Thank you everyone who has hustled back from lunch on this most beautiful November afternoon to be here. This session is connecting with your writing students in the virtual classroom. My name is Stephanie Sommers. I am the, hi Christine. I am the ACES coordinator for Atlas. I am also a teacher with Minneapolis Public Schools Adult Ed. I'm the Adult Diploma Coordinator, and I'm the Writing Curriculum Team Lead for my program, which means I help support the other writing teachers in our program with planning their lessons, especially since the switch to online learning. And we collaborate a lot around our materials that we use, our scope and sequence for our trimesters and things like that. All right, so just a few objectives for the session today. We are going to name some strategies for engagement, for encouraging student production, and for providing feedback, again, in a virtual space. We are going to locate some resources and tools to use in your classroom. And we're going to reflect on what you and other writing teachers are doing to support learners during remote learning. I know that we're going to have a lot of participation in the chat, and I know we're going to learn so much from each other because I've already learned a ton from being at a couple other sessions during this conference. All right, I will talk for just a minute. I think it's helpful to give background information when you do a session like this. So my writing class, since we've gone to remote learning, and my program is all remote, my writing class only meets one day a week. I have a class that meets on Fridays from 8:30 to 12:30. When we were in person, face-to-face, my writing class would have been 5 days a week for 1 hour a day, so about 5 hours a week. Now it's 4 hours a week, but we're just meeting on Fridays. There are 3 levels of writing in my program. We have an ELL Writing 1, an ELL Writing 2, and then I sort of teach the ABE GED writing class. And the class that I have right now is for both native and non-native English speakers. Some of the other classes, some of the other writing classes, they actually are meeting Monday through Thursday for 2 hours a day. So we are lucky to have some dedicated, designated writing classes in our program. Enrollment in my class so far this year has been hovering right around 30 students. However, my average class attendance is around 15. So any given Friday, I'm working with about half of my students, and about half of them, the other half, or maybe half of the other half, might be engaging with some online work, and I will talk about that a little bit. So we are using Schoology conferences, which is a feature within Schoology. Schoology is a learning management system, and conferences is a way for you to connect with your students face-to-face, so sort of like using Zoom or Google Meets or Classroom. Schoology conferences is a way that teachers can be in a space with their students meeting virtually. In conferences, you can do breakout rooms, you can use a chat, you can use an annotated whiteboard, all of those kinds of features. So it is the way that we are meeting with our students right now, but we're also providing asynchronous lessons also through Schoology. So teachers might put links in there, they might set up discussions in the discussion board, they might create assignments using other Schoology features. So it's kind of a mix of synchronous and asynchronous instruction. In our program in Minneapolis, right now, our teachers are using the Great Writing series for writing classes. Again, like I said, students usually have lessons and assignments that they work on outside of class each week in Schoology. And then another thing that we use very, very heavily is Remind, which is a communication tool. It's like an app that your students use, and they get any kind of messages from you show up on their phone like text messages. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in the session today. So if you were in my pre-lunch session, you also, we had a slide like this at the beginning, because I'd like to hear from all of you and what you have been doing. So how have you been engaging with your writing students so far this school year? What is something that you've done that has helped to increase learner engagement during the shutdown? And what's one challenge with teaching writing online, something that you've been struggling with? So I'm gonna give us a little wait time here and let people put some information, some thoughts in the chat. You could maybe pick one of those questions to respond to, and then we'll read those out and see what people are thinking. All right, so I knew if we waited just a moment, we'd start getting a lot of stuff going on in the chat. So Colleen says she's got a personal narrative assignment. She's having students read stories from journeys and struggling with students who have not submitted anything. Yes, I'm sad to say our program usually has a pretty big presence with journeys. We submit quite a lot of student work, and this year, unfortunately, I'm not sure we're going to be doing that, but I love the idea of using journeys both as model texts and inspiration for your students, and encouraging them to get published. And John says, provide meaningful feedback for redrafting. I'd love to hear some of your specific ways that you approach that, John, when we get to the feedback section here. Tammy says, Zooming one-on-one. A lot of people have mentioned they have students in class and online, so doing both, that's really impressive. Roz, I think this is probably a challenge, a variety of writing levels and experiences within one group. Lots of tiny write-in assignments. I think that's great, Elizabeth, about really broadening what we think of as writing practice. And it doesn't just have to be an essay or a paragraph, but what can we do every day or every class session to get students writing? Using Google Docs, doing small groups. Jeannie says, asking students to email me and answer questions. When students are on phones, it's hard to type. They dictate to me and I type. Wow, that's some dedication, Kelly. That sounds really, really, really amazing. Penny says, we complete a graphic organizer in class comparing two persuasive texts. Students then use the graphic organizer to write an extended response as homework. They share their writing via Google Docs. That's amazing. So people are taking on the RLA with writing groups. That looks really cool. Pear Deck. So I just learned about Pear Deck, George, and I actually looked at it for inclusion in this session, but I didn't have time to learn enough about it. But I have heard cool things about Pear Deck, and I'm excited to try that. From what I understand, it makes Google Slides more interactive. One challenge is that students are inclined to use Google Translate when writing. Yeah, Sue-Ann. I have one student who I am positive does a lot of Google translating because some of what he posts is just not very natural sounding. So I feel you on that one. More about small groups. Carlin says she's teaching a new writing class this year, and they're using Seed Folks. That in our program, we have a tradition of doing a book club every year, and that was one they did a couple years ago. That's very cool. A challenge is peer review. Yes, I even have a challenge with peer review in the regular classroom. I find that is difficult for me. John says he needs ideas. Well, John, I'm hoping you get maybe one today. Maybe if we work together, we can come up with at least one. We've got, yeah, suspect essays. I've talked about that a lot with my writing team, just the idea that that's one of the challenges is you don't know who's doing that work. And so that is definitely something that's a little different from when we can see our students doing the writing in the classroom. Okay, and someone else said they're also using Seed Folks. That's very cool. And Colleen's asking about Quill. One of the teachers on my team last year, Colleen, was a big fan of Quill. I never got into using it, but I know she liked it as well. Just because people are talking about books that they're using. So we do normally do a book club, as I mentioned. I'm gonna grab something real quickly. And in the spring before the shutdown, we were planning on using this book here. It's called Someone Like Me, How One Undocumented Girl Fought for Her American Dream. And it is a young adult novel about an undocumented Latina woman, and she came to the United States illegally as a child and went on to become the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. And we were going to use this before the shutdown in my classes as an example of narrative writing and telling personal stories. So I love that idea of using literature with our students. Christine says Quill uses sentence combining to improve writing, and she's had some good results, and other people are talking about Quill too. Someone says there's some Quill webinars. Okay, excellent. Well, thank you all for sharing your ideas in the chat, and I can't wait to see what else we get to and other things that come out during our session here. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about are some engagement strategies and a couple ideas, and a lot of this has been brought up already during the conference, but using breakout rooms, using discussion posts, looking at Google Jamboard, and then I'll show you a little bit about how I use Remind, okay? So here is an example from my class of how I used breakout rooms in my last class session, actually. So the students, we've been working on process writing. So the white box on your screen there shows an example of a process paragraph that I wrote, and the paragraph is missing some things. So it's missing a topic sentence, it's missing a title, it doesn't have a conclusion, it doesn't have any transition words. And so I set this up last year and we did it in class. And the students are supposed to look at the paragraph, identify at least 3 things that are wrong, and then work to fix it. So this year, I tried it online and we went into breakout rooms, and I in Google conferences, or I'm sorry, in Schoology conferences, you can show your slides, and then if you put students into breakout rooms, they can still see the slides. So what I found is as long as my directions are on the screen, then the students in the breakout room are able to read the directions and work. And so here I wanted to show just one kind of specific example of how I've used a breakout room to try to replicate that idea of being in class and collaborating with your colleagues. Another very cool idea that a lot of the teachers on my writing team have is this idea of writing a group or collaborative paragraph. And I think that's another way that you could use breakout rooms is after students have learned about a particular type of writing, such as process writing, and they've read some examples, putting them into a group, having them choose a topic, and then working together to come up with a basic paragraph that they put together as a team. And Christine says, I love the explicit note about no grammar mistakes, right? Because otherwise they would spend their whole time, of course, looking for where I missed a comma. So yes, thank you for pointing that out. Now, I will talk a little bit about a discussion board. And so Schoology, of course, has a discussion feature. I want to mention, so Schoology is one learning management system. I went to a nice session this morning done by Elizabeth Bennett. I think it was, I know it had the word MacGyver in the title, like teaching from a distance like MacGyver or something. And she was an advocate for adopting an LMS. And she talked about one that is free. And I think it's Canvas free for teachers. So if anyone has questions, Patsy says Elizabeth's here. You could maybe ask her about that in the chat. And so I know she mentioned also using discussion boards. And so, yeah, it's a free version of Canvas. And so I can put something like this up in a discussion, put the picture up, and then my students look at it, and I give them specific questions to think about. So the picture comes from What's Going On in This Picture, which is from the New York Times. It's a weekly feature where they take a picture from the newspaper and they strip away the caption, and then you have to talk about what's going on, and I use it to talk about claims and evidence. So students make a guess about what's going on. I tell them that's their claim, and they have to find specific evidence from the picture. So in this instance, they might say, I think people were running and they fell down, and they fell down because it was raining recently and it's wet, and my evidence is I can see mud. And one of my students said the man on the ground, he's got a pained look on his face. I think he hurt himself, things like that. Oops, excuse me, I'm sorry, I went ahead. And so I definitely, oh my gosh, Stephanie. So I definitely have them do a specific claim and a specific, some specific evidence. And one thing I found is I like to give very explicit directions to my students. So you could do this activity either like as a warm-up at the beginning of a class, or I've also used it as a prompt in a discussion. But I tell them, you know, have a piece of paper, have a pencil ready, and you're going to write for 5 to 10 minutes on your own, and then we can share out. But first, we're going to do the writing on our own. And just because I know some of you will be wondering, this particular picture was from my class last Friday, and this was actually a zombie fun run. And so I think the man and the woman bending over the guy on the ground, they are zombies, and the guy on the ground fell prey to the zombies during the fun run. So that was part of my Thanksgiving, or excuse me, my Halloween lesson. And of course, you can find what's going on in this picture by following the link on this slide, or by Googling what's going on in this picture, New York Times. Another example of some discussion posts that I've done come from a resource that I've added to the, it's in the participant folder so that you will have it. It's a PDF document. It's called 365 Days of Writing Prompts. And so here's a couple. One of them is writing about a talent. If you could have any talent that you don't have, what would it be? Explain. And I found that if I tell my students you have to write at least this many sentences, I sometimes get better results. So like your post should have at least 6 sentences. Or sometimes I remind them I need you to write incomplete sentences. Another one that came from this 365 days was, if your house was on fire and you only have time to grab 5 things, what would you grab? And then I mention all of your family members and animals are safe so that they don't, you know, focus on that. And then of course, the last one is an example of when I did another what's going on in this picture. So discussion boards are a great way for students to collaborate, for them to get ideas, to see examples of each other's writing, and get to know each other in a virtual space. If they're explaining a little bit about a talent or what they value most, it's a great idea. It's a great way for them to share a little bit about themselves. And then other students can read their posts, they can reply. It works a lot like Facebook in that way. At least it does in Schoology. And Christine says, students can really practice pieces of speaking and listening anchor 1 with these discussion posts as they learn how to ask each other questions, disagree politely, add to what another student said. Yes, that's great. So sometimes I give that direction. You must respond to the post and then respond to at least 2 or 3 of your classmates, asking them a question or leaving a specific piece of feedback or making a comment on something you read. So yeah, it's a great way to build community and get your students practicing writing. And again, all of the prompts you should be able to download, okay? And then Jamboard. So I'm thinking Patsy's going to chat out a link to a Jamboard, and we're going to look at that. So Jamboard is a Google product. That's what the little image is in the right corner of your screen here. So to create a new Jamboard, you go, just like you would to find a Google document or a Google Slides. Google Jamboard's just kind of underneath those options. And so if you want to, you can actually click on that link and you can check out the Jamboard. And the purpose of this Jamboard is we've been working in class on pie paragraphs. And so the things that are on the white as text boxes, those would be, so if you don't know what a pie paragraph is, it's a way to get students to add more details to their writing. So the P stands for point, and the I is information, and the E is example or expansion, or example, expansion, or explanation. And so it's a way to get students just from writing I like winter, in winter there is snow, my children play outside, that's why winter is good. So they have information there, but they're not really adding a lot of detail. They're missing the E, the expansion or example part. So this Jamboard here, the purpose of this Jamboard was to get students to take the sticky notes and to move them onto, to match them up with the points. So the sticky notes are examples, and what's on the screen, the white part is the point, and is the information, and the sticky notes are the examples. And so I am afraid to look at the board live because I'm afraid I'll mess up my slides. But if you are in there, you can move the sticky notes around, you can match them up with the point. And so, for example, first it has delicious and healthy food, and then you would match that with their best dish is grilled fish, that orange sticky note. It is prepared well with good seasoning, but not too much salt or fat, the yellow sticky note. And so the idea is the students can actually move the sticky notes onto other places on the board. And this is also a way I was thinking where students might be able to do some writing, because if they kind of created or collaborated on their own Jamboard, they could do something similar where maybe one student had the big ideas and someone else added some of the examples, something like that. And someone said, I'm on the Jamboard and it works. Okay, great, thank you. I'm too much of a coward to go to it myself right now, so I'm glad it's working. All right, and just a little bit more about Jamboard here. If any of you, for those of you who don't belong to any links groups, then it's something to be aware of. Links is a national repository of information for adult educators, and they have these different groups, like they have a technology group, they have a reading group, they have an instructional strategies group, and you can join links. You just have to create an account, and then you can join different groups, and then there's always these very interesting discussions going on. And especially now when we're a little bit isolated from being around our colleagues, it's a great way to get ideas from other people. And so I was looking in the reading and writing group, and I saw this cool post about using Google Jamboard. And if you were to join links and find this yourself, there's like a link to a tutorial and some other ideas about how to use it. You'll see they talk about using what's going on in this picture with their Jamboard. And there's also a link to an article, and the article's in the bottom left corner, getting out of a jam with Google Jamboard. So if this is something you'd like to know more about and like to know how other people are using Jamboards, it would be worth your time maybe to join links and check it out. And I've got Christine saying students like Jamboard. Yep. Do all your students have the Jamboard app? No, when I used it in class, I just chatted the link out through the chat, and they just went out there and worked with mine. but I'm guessing you could do it in different ways. Yeah, and then someone said if you had too many people trying to do it at one time, it would not load. Yes, I would imagine that there are limits to how many folks can get into your Jamboard without it getting a bit jammed up. So thanks for mentioning that. I don't maybe have enough experience to know all of the ins and outs, but it is pretty fun and different. And my students really liked it when we used it in class. Finally, I will talk about Remind. So Remind again is an app, and I'm going to tell you, I don't know if it costs money. I think that it does. I think that my program pays for it. I use it with my program. I'm not sure all the ins and outs of how you sign up for it. So I should be upfront about that. But we use Remind. All students in our programs get Remind accounts when they go through our orientation. And I wanted to show you like an example of last week after class, or every week before and after class, I send reminders like the one you see on the screen. I remind students like, hey, we have class today. Here's what we're going to work on. And then after class, I say, hey, thanks for coming to class. If you remember, here's what we talked about. And here's where you could, find our recording or go to other resources. So this was when we'd been talking about pie paragraphs, and I could include this graphic here, like a snip, a screenshot of the pie paragraph example, and students are able to look at that. And I have found students who do not respond using email, they tend to be really into using Remind. And maybe it's just because we're always on our phones so much, but I get students sending me messages all the time. And it's also a way that I give a lot of feedback to my students. So I can take screenshots of their work and send them, attach the screenshot to a message in Remind. You can also record short audio clips of yourself speaking and send it through Remind. So there's lots of things you can do with it. And I want to say thanks, Margaret, for mentioning the basic Remind app is free. It's also possible to use Remind without installing the app. Students just get a text message. Great. All right, so those were some of our engagement strategies. And I hope you saw something that you might find useful. And I'd love for people to continue using the chat to share what they're doing. Roz says they use the free version in order to stay in touch with all our students, especially in case of bad weather. Yeah. We also send flyers, materials for class. Yep. Okay, and new students receive invitations. Yeah, that's great. And it's just another layer of communication, because we do a lot of that too. And then we can also do that through Schoology by sending out, updates and announcements like that. So I think the more channels of communication you have open, the better. All right, so now I'm going to get into student production. And I'm going to talk about using Google Docs or slides or forms, teaching a Northstar digital literacy lesson, using Google applied digital skills. And then just, we can always go lower tech and have our students write on paper and take a photo. And I want to say one of the cool things about this conference is some of these are things I had not thought about until someone mentioned them in their session. Like the Google Applied Skills was brought up yesterday, and I have used them, but I hadn't thought to include them here. So this has been, it's great to have so many ideas bouncing around. So one thought that I had about a way to get students to give them some help and encouragement with doing writing was maybe to use Google Slides as a sort of template. So I have put together, just this morning, a few slides for a process paragraph, right? And then I thought each slide could remind students what they need to include. So like your first slide could be your topic sentence, then your first step. Then we've got for that pie paragraph, the E, your expansion, explanation, or example. And then you could, of course, duplicate that a number of times and have step 2, step 3. And then the last slide could be the conclusion. And the reason I like, Google products, of course, is because through a learning management system like Schoology, you can easily integrate a Google assignment and then all students can get it at the same time. But even if you don't use a learning management system, you can chat out a link to a document that you've created. You can teach your students to make a copy of it. And then it's a pretty easy way to get them going on an assignment. I know that it doesn't always work great with a phone, but it is just one idea. And I like this idea of breaking it into slides because it provides a little bit of scaffolding, I was thinking. And so this was one thought I had for getting students to do some writing production. Another idea, and someone brought up using forms earlier today, and it reminded me that we had tried this last year in my writing team, because a big concern that we have had is, you can have students coming to class and you can get them doing activities, but it can be hard to actually get students to produce writing when they're not in front of you, sort of, because it can feel awkward to like, okay, we're in class and this is class time, and now we're all just going to spend 20 minutes here in front of our computers writing. But, so we've been trying to talk about different ways to encourage students to write, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And so another thing that's kind of easy to share is a Google form. And because you can do long answers in a Google form, you can, and the thing about Google Forms also is you can send them out and you can set your permission so that anyone with the link can open them. And so this is, it's maybe more user-friendly than using docs or slides, is what I hear from people. And so I set this one up to kind of model, again, my pie paragraph. What is your topic sentence could be the first question. Please type at least 5 steps in your process paragraph and add some examples or explanations. And then what is your concluding sentence? And just to kind of show you that you can put quite a lot of text into a long answer on paragraph when you have long answer text as your response for your question, if that's how you set it up. What you see to the right of the screen there is last year we were trying this out with the other writing teachers, and this was one of the teachers' responses. I am waiting for students to join my conference. While I wait, I will quickly write a paragraph just to see if this would be a good option for students. And then she says, every few minutes I'm looking for students, and she's just kind of writing. And then she says, this does look like a nice option. No spell check. Some students appreciate that when they write. But then it's nice to see what they can do their own work. Okay, I'm bored now. I think I will stop writing and find something else to do. And then she says, wait, I like this option. So using Google Forms, another way for you to start something and share it out with your students. So keeping to the chat, there was some talk about, do they need Gmail accounts? Yes, they do. Other people say that they use Google Forms for writing in different ways. Christine says she does it for sentence combining. One idea that I haven't tried yet is to have students make a questionnaire on a given topic as a small group in Google Forms to give to their classmates. Yeah, and no, it's not paragraph level, but it's a great writing and collaboration activity. And it's a great sort of lower stakes way to get students writing. And you could always practice all kinds of sentence level stuff with that, encouraging them to do maybe compound or complex sentences. And I love that idea. That's really fun. All right, so using different Google products. And then another thing that I was thinking about is the Northstar digital literacy lessons. There is a whole collection of lessons that focus on using Microsoft Word. And so this is the scope and sequence for the Microsoft Word lessons. There are 7 lessons here in the Microsoft Word collection. One of them, lesson 7, is about creating and editing a doc. And I kind of like this lesson because it gets students working with the templates that are available in Microsoft Word. And this particular lesson has them creating a brochure, and they're meant to create a brochure for a restaurant. And they can do things like insert images. But what I like is you wouldn't necessarily have to, follow the direct, this is sort of a jumping off point, I think, the directions in the lesson. You could have them do more writing to make it a more writing focused activity. You could have them write a review of the restaurant, have them do some opinion writing, have them support those opinions. And so I like the idea of using some of these Northstar digital literacy lessons, because then we would know that we were doing it kind of an integrated skills approach. We'd be teaching multiple standards. We would have writing, we would have language, we'd be doing digital literacy. And these lessons are a great opportunity to have you go step by step with teaching some of the skills that I know I don't always teach in my writing class, like editing, like formatting, like how to use the templates. I don't think I've ever tried to teach my students how to use the templates. And so it's just kind of a great reminder about teaching vocabulary and helping our students to do more and be more independent. I know when my students write in class, I'm always focused on the writing. And then oftentimes I really help them. I provide a lot of assistance with the formatting. And I really should just be teaching them to do that themselves. And these lessons can be really great for that. And then just, another idea outside of Northstar is the Google Applied Digital Literacy Skills lessons. And so these came up yesterday. And I actually have used these in my writing class. To the left, you can see you can sort in multiple ways at this website. So you can actually look for lessons that are just for adult learners, which are all focused on really practical adult skills that adults need, like creating a resume, for example. You can also sort by a particular tool. You can sort by a topic. And then to the right of that on your screen, I took a screenshot of 6 lessons in the ELA collection. And, I don't have a lot of personal experience with these lessons from this ELA collection, but I think like anything, they could be a good jumping off point. They could provide some inspiration for you to get in there with your adaptive expertise and find some new things to teach, right? And so Patsy chatted out the link. I would be curious if anyone's used these to talk about them a little bit and talk about your experiences in the chat if you've liked them. I have done these before. I've done some of the lessons from Write using online research. And they go through some how to do a search and those kinds of things, an online search. And I have found these to be, oh, someone says the link doesn't work. Oh, goodness. Missing the letter E at the end of the link. That's my fault. Sorry about that. So we'll get that fixed.
Sorry, just a second. I'll grab it.
I think that's my fault, I'm sure. Patsy also chatted out the document, that the lesson 7 from Northstar. So you don't even have to go to the Northstar site yourself. You could just grab it from here. Thank you, Jamie. Sorry, that I'm sure that was me when I put it in incorrectly. But, these are just some, I'll just be honest with you. What I like most about these lessons is they're already done and someone else wrote them. And so they're something you can grab and use. You can kind of see here, their example is someone someone writing about Helen Keller. So it goes through, writing a research paper and the different steps. And you might not use all of it because this one is fairly extensive, 5 to 10 hours, but you could find pieces here that might be useful in your classroom. And doing research is a really, important college skill. So I would, again, be interested if anyone else has used these to share some of your thoughts. Okay. And then the last one in this section, I told you that we would talk just for a minute about, well, what if I'm not online? What if my students are lower tech? And so I stole this slide. I stole it straight out from a COAB session that I attended this summer. And I liked the clear kind of method that this teacher described, the presenter described, for how to give feedback when a student sends you pictures of their written work. So the student took a picture of those 5 sentences, sent it to the teacher, and Remind is a great vehicle for sending pictures like this. And the steps are, the student takes a picture of their homework, the teacher corrects sentences using audio. The student listens to the teacher and makes the corrections, and then the student sends the corrections to the teacher. So I liked how tidy this was with the steps, and I think it would, possibly work pretty well in a, a lower level class, maybe where your students weren't doing as much online. Penny chatted out, we have used Google Applied Literacy in our tech classes. The step-by-step video instruction has worked well for our students who are intermediate or advanced readers. We used about a presentation, start a resume, create a budget. Thank you, Penny, for that and for reminding me. Yes, I wanted to say I was showing the researching ones, the lesson. Other lessons in the adult ed section would be creating a professional email, creating a resume. And one that I thought looked really interesting is learning how to give and receive written feedback. And I think that might be a lesson I'd like to try out because it gets back to like what someone shared earlier. A challenge can be getting students to be comfortable with giving each other feedback and going through any kind of peer feedback process. And so I'm wondering if that lesson might be a place to start with doing some work around that. Emily says, I just taught feedback, like the feedback lesson, Emily, oh, fantastic. Did you like it? Would you recommend it? Your exclamation point tells me maybe you're enthusiastic about it. I'd love to know more if you have time to chat out. I'd love to know if you thought it was useful. Okay. So, she says, yes, it went really well. Thank you, Emily. I think we need access though, Emily. Okay. Well, you guys will work that out in the chat and I will talk about the last kind of section here, which is providing feedback. So some of the things that I think are important for providing feedback. I teach the academic language for talking about writing. I feel like that's really important. And I know someone's going to ask me at all levels. And yeah, I think like whatever you're working on with your students, if they're at a level that they can understand that, they can be taught a couple vocabulary words, I think. Screenshots of student work, short videos or screencasts, and then single point rubrics. These are the things we'll talk about for providing feedback. Okay, so here we go. This is another Jamboard. This is one I used with my students, and I couldn't share it with you today because my students seem to have erased it. So that's something to know about Jamboard, and I think there are ways you can like protect your Jamboards if you want to use them in the future. I had a screenshot of this one, so I was able to share the screenshot, but the actual Jamboard is now gone. But this was how earlier this trimester, I was working with my students on some writing terminology. So I teach my students phrase, clause, independent clause, dependent clause, sentence, of course, and then run-on and fragment. And I feel like it's really important to teach those terms because those are where students often make mistakes at the sentence level. And or I could, talk around trying to explain to them like, well, this sentence isn't correct because it doesn't, it's not a complete idea or something. And, I just find it's a little bit, it's easier if I can just say, this is only a dependent clause and we both kind of know what I'm talking about. And then I can go on to say, so what do you have to add to this dependent clause to make it a correct sentence? And I'm not saying all of my students get it all the time, but when I was in class, I would have posters with this terminology up in the classroom and my students could see them and refer to them. We did a lot of work around this. And so on this Jamboard, they had to match the small sticky note vocabulary terms with the larger definitions. So one thing I would suggest for being able to provide feedback is to talk with your students and teach your students the vocabulary that we use to talk about writing. Another thing that I do, and I mentioned this before when we were talking about Remind, is I use Remind and I use screenshots to talk about my students' work. So what you're seeing here are screenshots. So let me back up. The blue part is my Remind message. That's where I'm talking to the student using Remind. Underneath, like the white part, is a screenshot from Schoology. It's a screenshot from a Schoology assessment. And this assessment here had to do with identifying different types of sentence errors. So studying all night for the big test next week is a what, folks? It is a what? It is a, no one's going to give it to me in the chat box. It is a fragment. Thank you, Laura. Yes, Laura and Laura, hats off to you. That's a fragment. That's correct. And so I created this assessment. My students look at this, and then they were supposed to write in the box below, they were supposed to fix it. And so this person wrote, I've been studying all night because I have a big test next week. And so I took a screenshot of that. And I found it, I was getting frustrated because the students were doing their work, but it was really hard for me to talk about their work with them in Schoology in the assessment. So I started taking screenshots and then I could show them an example of a kind of mistake they were making. And then if they can look at it, then it's easier for me to just say, you did a great job, but after night here, you have a period. There should not be a period there. And so that's an example of a mistake. I think this student had a habit of adding extra punctuation mark. And then there was another example that the one on the right there is the opposite of a fragment. That's a run-on. And the student had to divide the sentence so that it wasn't a run-on. And so I was able to take a screenshot and I was able to explain the mistake. I think that Marty and Krista had a quiet night at home. They cooked dinner and watched a movie. I think I might have typed that answer into the box and the student might have left it blank and I was trying to explain what they were supposed to do. So coupling Remind with screenshots, I have found makes it a lot easier to talk about student work if you're doing any kind of like assessments or quizzes where you might want a picture of what they actually responded, if that makes sense. Jamie wrote, another way I do this is type out a list of vocab in one column in Word and the randomized definitions in the other, screen share in Zoom and have the students annotate. Yeah, that sounds And draw lines. Yep. So I think they're talking about like learning about vocabulary and matching terms. That's a very creative. I love how outside the box people have gotten with their thinking and ways of creating lessons that have some interactivity. So that's a cool idea, Jamie. All right, so here we are using Remind to provide and screenshots to provide feedback. This slide and the next slide I borrowed from Adam Kiefer. I went to Adam's session yesterday. It was a great session about teaching digital literacy skills remotely. I know he co-presented that. And in his session, he talked a lot about how important it is to learn how to make screencasts for your students. And so I asked him if I could borrow this slide and share it with you, and he said that would be fine. So there are some links here to different screencasting, like a screencast tutorial. There are some videos that tell you how to make a screencast on an iPhone, how to use Screencast-O-Matic and Screencastify. If these links aren't working, like we can, yes, I think Patsy's telling you how you can get them. So being able to make a screencast is a great way for you to even like walk through a piece of writing that a student has done, talking, kind of doing like a think aloud for your student. You could have the piece of writing on your screen. You could be talking about where you think there might be issues, record the whole thing, and send that to your student. I understand if you were working with a lot of students, that would be possibly time prohibitive, but it is a great way when we can't really conference face-to-face to let students know how they're doing. Yeah, so Patsy's been chatting these out and letting people know that they're available. And I want to thank Adam for giving me permission to share. This slide also is from Adam's session. He just talked about snipping tools. And even on a phone, if you press your power button and your volume button at the same time, you can get a screencast or a snip of something you're looking at on your phone, which of course can be really helpful if your students are using phones. You could help them to see what something would look like on a phone, okay? And then my last piece about providing feedback is the idea of using a single point rubric. So a single point rubric, for anyone who's not familiar, you can see it here. It's where all of your criteria or look for are in a column down the center of the screen. So here I have two examples. I have one for a pro-con paragraph, and I have one for a process paragraph. And those those arrows are to kind of show you like, while some of the targets are the same, like the ones for the appearance are mostly the same, you can customize these so that they align with the type of writing that you're doing. So for the pro-con paragraph, it's one of the criteria under content is it must contain at least 2 reasons that are pro and 2 reasons that are con. That would be different for a different type of writing. So for the process paragraph under content, paragraph contains at least 5 clear steps. In process writing, often people teach imperatives. And so, one of your criteria might be using imperatives within the paragraph and using them correctly. And so you can personalize your targets to go with the type of writing and grammar that you're teaching. But the idea of a single point rubric is all of those criteria go down the center of the page. And then to the left, where it says below target, you could make comments or give examples of where the student is not quite meeting that expectation. And to the right, you would list where they meet or exceed the expectation. I usually share the rubric when I give the assignment. And then I often have my students use the rubric to self-assess one of their drafts and or their final product. And then I use the same rubric to do my own, give my own feedback. And I think it's often interesting to see where the student and I agree and disagree. Sometimes students are very hard on themselves and criticize things where I think that their writing is actually, you know, better than they've made it seem. And the opposite can be true too. Students can just not be very good at identifying their own mistakes. But single point rubrics I find very helpful. I've never been good at using or designing those rubrics where you're like scoring things like 1, 2, 3, 4 or something like that. I just like the straightforward nature here, where I don't have to decide what a 3 or a 4 is. I can just say whether or not they were above or below the target and pull out reasons why. You can also, of course, co-create these rubrics with your students. After you've been talking about a type of writing, you could help them to, you could work with them so that you could decide together what some of the targets or look fors should be down that middle column. Jamie says, have I used it for peer review? I don't think so. Mostly self-review. I mean, I definitely think you could. That's a weakness of mine. I've had some bad experiences trying to do peer review, and I don't do it as much as I should. But yes, I think you could definitely adapt it for speeches. I like to have students use rubrics on other students' writing, and then the final step is for it to use it on their own. Yeah, so Emily, I like that idea. And so I've done something similar, like with a model text, either from a book or something that I write, or maybe a piece of writing from a student in another class or from a previous year. Sometimes I've asked students, can I show your piece of writing and can we apply a rubric? Yeah, I've done that too. I think it's great for students to really hear you go through a piece of work and talk about where it's meeting and not meeting the expectations, sort of like a norming process. I think that can be really valuable. So yes, Maren, you're welcome to use them and put them in a resource library. That would be just fine. All right. So yes, we are done. We are at the end and we have 3 minutes left, and these 3 minutes are to for you guys now to share anything that you have liked from the session, any ideas that might have been shaken loose for you, things that you would like to maybe try with your students when you meet in the future. So screencast, excellent. Single point rubrics. Yeah, and Jamie, mine work for me. And you can definitely also like Google single point rubrics and find other examples. But they were a big game changer for me because frankly, I hated rubrics before I found this method. Jamboard. So yeah, you know, I learned about single point rubrics from an ABE colleague, Dr. Jamie Creel, and she introduced them to me and in the past, and I have been using them ever since. So Jamboard, Google Forms, Jamboard, excellent. Yeah, I'm glad to see, Roz, that you said you might try Northstar. That's fantastic. Yeah, I like the idea of trying those lessons. Okay, great. I'm glad other people are kind of motivated to give Jamboard another go and read that article. Look at the links discussion if you can. That will give you even more ideas. Screencast to talk through feedback. Yep. The feedback correction strategy, good. Using photos, fantastic. Applied digital literacy. Drag and drop to create jigsaws, very cool. What's going on in this picture? Great. And Carlin says, I used some Northstar lessons to teach cut, copy, paste because it became a necessary skill. Yeah, you know, one thing I like about the Northstar lessons is just like anything else, you can kind of take what you want from there. And if the whole lesson doesn't necessarily apply to you, pulling out pieces that do, I think. So this is it. We're at the end. If you were in my before lunch session, you maybe already watched this video, but I'm ending my sessions today with a big thank you. And this video here is Patsy chatted out the link to it. It is a thank you from the actors on Schitt's Creek for teachers. It is a thank you teachers video, and I love it. And if you are a fan of this show, you'll love it too. Thank you everyone for being here. Enjoy the rest of your sessions and the rest of the conference.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Just a friendly reminder, you have a 15-minute break now, and then you have the final session, and the CEUs are available, again, via the flyers. So you have to fill out an evaluation for both yesterday and today to get those evaluations done, and then your CEUs are downloaded right from there. Thanks, everyone. And I have not had a chance to view this video yet, but I'm told it's a must-see. So do that before the day is up. It sounds like a good one. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in a few minutes in your next session. Stephanie, thank you.
Thank you.